I'm Daisy, 23 female. I live in a small, quiet city that I now call my own, in a one-bedroom apartment with a view of the park. As a freelance UX/UI designer, my days are filled with wireframes, color palettes, and the quiet hum of my laptop, a life I built from scratch. It's a peaceful existence, a world away from the noise and chaos of the family that cast me out without a second thought. This is the story of how my own father threw me away to fund his golden child's future, and how my silence became the most powerful response I could ever have given. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Growing up, our house was less of a home and more of a stage for a play I had no script for. The star of the show was always Kyle, my stepbrother. My father, Mark, married Karen when I was 10 and Kyle was 7. From that day forward, the family dynamic shifted on its axis. Mark, who had been a reasonably attentive father, became obsessed with creating the perfect nuclear family, and in his eyes, the cornerstone of that family was his new wife and her son. I, his biological daughter, became a relic of a past life he seemed eager to forget. Karen was a master of subtle manipulation. She never raised her voice at me or did anything overtly cruel. Instead, she perfected the art of exclusion. She would forget to buy my favorite snack at the grocery store, accidentally shrink my favorite sweater in the laundry, or plan family outings on days she knew I had unavoidable commitments. Each incident was small enough to seem like a mistake, but the pattern was undeniable. I was being systematically erased. The financial favoritism was the most glaring issue. Mark owned a local diner, the Corner Spoon, a place that had been in his family for 2 generations. It was a town institution, but in recent years it had been struggling. Despite this, there was always money for Kyle. New gaming consoles, expensive brand-name clothes, a brand new car the day he turned 16, his every whim was catered to. Meanwhile, I worked part-time jobs all through high school to pay for my own clothes, my phone bill, and any social activities. When I needed a laptop for my design courses in college, I was given a lecture on fiscal responsibility and told to save up for it myself. A month later, Kyle received the latest, most expensive model as a surprise for getting a B on a midterm. The double standard wasn't just tolerated, it was the foundation of our family life. My room was the smallest in the house, a converted attic space that was freezing in the winter and sweltering in the summer. I never complained. It was my sanctuary, the one place where I could shut the door and escape the suffocating atmosphere downstairs. It was where I taught myself graphic design, sketching logos and building websites for imaginary companies. That small room was where I discovered my passion and honed the skills that would eventually become my career. Kyle, on the other hand, had the second largest bedroom, a mini palace filled with every gadget imaginable. He called it his command center. I just called it the black hole where my father's money went to die. The worst part was how my dad, Mark, enabled it all. He saw Kyle as his legacy, the son who would study business and one day take over the diner, transforming it into a modern, thriving enterprise. He was blind to Kyle's laziness and complete lack of ambition. Kyle's idea of a business plan was asking if the diner could install a slushy machine. The tension reached a new peak when Kyle was accepted into a prestigious and incredibly expensive out-of-state university. The tuition alone was astronomical, not to mention housing, meal plans, and what Karen called essential social funding. They threw a huge party to celebrate. Relatives I hadn't seen in years were there, all patting Kyle on the back and congratulating Mark and Karen on raising such a fine young man. I spent most of the party in the kitchen, refilling chip bowls and making sure the drinks cooler was stocked. No one seemed to notice. My grandmother, Alina, my dad's mom, was the only one who saw what was really happening. She pulled me aside that evening, her hand warm on my arm. "Don't let them grind you down, Daisy," she whispered, her eyes sharp and knowing. "You have a fire in you they can't put out. Remember that." Grandma Alina and I had always been close. She saw through Karen's sweet facade from day one and had a strained relationship with her own son, Mark, because of it. She was my only true ally in that family. A few weeks before Kyle was scheduled to leave for college, Karen started making comments about my room. "You know, Daisy," she'd say, leaning against the doorframe while I worked, "this room has the best light in the house. It's a shame. It's so cramped with all your things." I knew what she was implying. Kyle the Prince needed a proper study, a place to focus on his important university work when he came home for the holidays. My small sanctuary was being eyed as a potential upgrade for him. I tried to talk to my dad about it. I found him in his recliner, watching a sports game, the volume turned up loud. "Dad," I started, trying to sound casual, "Karen's been talking about my room." He didn't take his eyes off the screen. "Yeah, what about it?" he grunted. "She thinks Kyle should use it as a study when he's home," I said, my voice small. He finally looked at me, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "Daisy, Kyle is going to be the first person in this family to get a degree from a place like that. He needs our full support. It's just a room." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. It wasn't just a room. It was my room. It was the only space in that entire house that felt like mine. "Where would I go?" I asked. He shrugged, his attention already back on the TV. "We'll figure it out. You're barely here anyway." The dismissal stung more than an outright argument would have. I wasn't a person with needs. I was a logistical problem to be figured out. The writing was on the wall, but I was still too naive to read it. I thought the worst they could do was move me to the tiny, windowless guest room in the basement. I had no idea how wrong I was. The day it happened started like any other Tuesday. I woke up early, went to my part-time job at a local coffee shop, and then spent the afternoon at the library, using their high-speed internet to work on a freelance web design project for a small bakery. I was saving every dollar I could, with the goal of moving out within the next year. The thought of having my own apartment, a space that couldn't be threatened or repurposed, was the light at the end of the tunnel. I got home around 6 in the evening, tired but satisfied with the progress I'd made. The first thing I noticed was the quiet. Usually, the TV would be blaring or I'd hear Karen on the phone, but the house was silent. A strange sense of unease crept over me as I walked up the driveway. That's when I saw it. On the front lawn, next to the perfectly manicured rose bushes Karen was so proud of, was a pile. Not just a pile of junk, but a pile of my life. My clothes, my books, my art supplies, my half-finished canvases, all of it was heaped in a disastrous mess on the grass. Several black trash bags were slumped beside it, already splitting at the seams, revealing more of my belongings. For a moment, my brain couldn't process the scene. It was so surreal, so utterly unbelievable, that I thought it must be a prank or a terrible mistake. Maybe there was a leak in my room, and they had to move everything out in a hurry. But the cruel neatness of the destruction told a different story. My framed photos were stacked together, face down. My collection of vintage design magazines was scattered, their pages ruffling in the slight breeze. This wasn't an emergency evacuation. This was a deliberate, calculated act of disposal. The front door opened, and my father stepped out onto the porch. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't angry. He stood there with his arms crossed, his face a mask of cold resolution. Karen stood just behind him in the doorway, a silent, smirking sentinel. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The words felt foreign in my mouth. Mark didn't flinch. "It's exactly what it looks like," he said, his tone flat and devoid of any emotion. "We're making some changes around here. Kyle needs a proper space to work when he's home from university, and frankly, it's time you stood on your own 2 feet. I stared at him, then at the pile of my life on his precious lawn. "Stood on my own 2 feet? You're throwing me out?" The words sounded absurd even as I said them. "We're not throwing you out," Karen chimed in, stepping forward. Her voice was syrupy sweet, which made it all the more venomous. "We're giving you the opportunity to start your own life. You're 23, Daisy. It's time." Hypocrisy was breathtaking. They had spent years funding Kyle's extended adolescence, but I, who had been paying for my own existence since I was a teenager, was being lectured about independence. "So you throw my things on the lawn? Like garbage?" I asked, a wave of hot anger finally starting to cut through the shock. My father's jaw tightened. "Don't be dramatic. We packed what we could. The rest is in your room. You can come get it, but you're not sleeping here tonight. You're not welcome here anymore." That was the line. "You're not welcome here anymore." It was so final, so absolute. It severed the last remaining thread of hope I had that he still saw me as his daughter. I looked from his cold face to Karen's triumphant one, and I understood. This was her victory. She had finally succeeded in cutting me out completely. In that moment, something in Sid. Amy shifted. The hurt was immense, a physical ache in my chest, but something else rose to meet it, a cold, hard clarity. Arguing was pointless. Pleading would be humiliating. They had made their decision. They didn't want a daughter, they wanted a vacancy. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I looked at my father, the man who was supposed to protect me, and I felt nothing but a profound and sudden emptiness. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my car keys. My beat-up 10-year-old sedan was my only real asset, bought with 2 years of coffee shop savings. Then I pulled out the key to the house. I walked up to the porch, stopped just before the first step, and held it out to him. "You'll be wanting this back then," I said. My voice was eerily calm. He looked at the key, then at my face, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He had expected tears, a scene, a fight. He had not expected this quiet compliance. He took the key from my hand. I nodded once, a short, sharp gesture of finality. I turned my back on him, on Karen, and on the house I had grown up in. I didn't look at the pile of my belongings on the lawn. I walked to my car, got in, and started the engine. As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced in the rearview mirror. They were still standing on the porch, watching me go, their expressions unreadable. I drove without a destination, the silence in the car a roaring in my ears. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was never going back. The first tear finally fell as I turned onto the highway, a single, hot drop that marked the end of my childhood. The first few hours were a blur. I drove until the gas light came on, ending up in a 24-hour diner 2 towns over, the irony of which was not lost on me. I ordered a coffee I couldn't afford and sat in a booth, staring into space. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a terrifying, all-consuming panic. I had my car, the clothes on my back, my laptop bag, which, thank God, I'd had with me, and about $200 in my bank account. I had no home, no family, and no plan. My first instinct was to call my grandmother, Alina. I scrolled to her contact, my thumb hovering over the call button, but I hesitated. It was late, and what could she do? She lived in a small retirement community apartment. She couldn't take me in, and I couldn't bear the thought of hearing the pain in her voice. Burdening her felt like my final failure. So, I did the only other thing I could think of. I opened my laptop and started to work. I found a freelance job board and applied for every small, quick turnaround design gig I could find. A logo for a podcast, a banner for a blog, a menu for a food truck. Anything to keep my hands busy and my mind from spiraling into the abyss. That night, I slept in my car in a Walmart parking lot, the seat reclined as far as it would go, my jacket balled up as a pillow. It was one of the longest, most miserable nights of my life. Every creak of the car, every passing headlight, sent a jolt of fear through me. The next morning, I used the Walmart bathroom to wash my face and brush my teeth. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back, a ghost with dark circles under her eyes. I knew I couldn't survive like this. I needed help. Swallowing my pride, I finally called the one person I knew I could trust. "Grandma," I said, my voice cracking as soon as I heard her say hello. "Daisy, honey, what's wrong?" I told her everything. She listened in horrified silence, her only interruptions being sharp intakes of breath. When I finished, her voice was laced with a fury I had never heard from her before. "That man," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "That man is no son of mine." She insisted I come to her. I explained that I couldn't stay with her, that her community had strict rules about long-term guests. "I know that," she said firmly. "Just get here. We'll figure it out together." Driving to her apartment, I felt a sliver of hope for the first time in 24 hours. Alina greeted me with a fierce hug that seemed to mend some of the broken pieces inside me. She sat me down, made me tea, and just let me talk. She didn't offer platitudes or easy solutions. She just listened, her presence a warm, steady anchor in my storm. Later that day, she made a phone call. It was to an old friend of hers, a woman who rented out rooms in her large, empty house. By that evening, I had a place to stay, a small, clean room with a bed, a desk, and a lock on the door. It felt like a palace. Grandma Alina paid the first month's rent and a security deposit, pressing the cash into my hand and refusing to hear any arguments. "This isn't a handout," she told me, her eyes firm. "This is an investment. I'm investing in you." A few days later, my Aunt Susan, my dad's sister, called me. She'd heard the news from Alina and was appalled. Susan and my dad had a strained relationship, largely due to Karen's influ. "NCE, Daisy, I'm so sorry," she said. "I went over there to get the rest of your things. They had shoved it all into your old room. Karen was complaining about the dust. She told me she had packed everything into boxes and was storing them in her garage for me. Then she dropped the bombshell. While I was there," she said, her voice hesitant, "I saw some mail on the kitchen counter. It was a financial aid statement from Kyle's university. I only caught a glimpse, but I saw the numbers. Daisy, their estimated family contribution was insane. There's no way Mark's Diner is making that kind of money." That's when it started to click. This wasn't just about giving Kyle a study space. This was about money. Susan continued. "Then Karen made a comment, something about how they had to liquidate some non-essential assets to make the first tuition payment. She said it with this little smile, looking right at your packed boxes. Liquidate non-essential assets. The phrase echoed in my mind. I was a non-essential asset. I wasn't just kicked out, I was cashed out. The cost of my food, my utilities, my car insurance, everything they had been covering, however grudgingly, was now money they could divert to Kyle's education fund. My presence in the house was a line item on a budget, and they had deleted it. The truth was so much colder and more calculating than a simple act of favoritism. They hadn't thrown me out in a fit of anger. They had done it as a financial strategy. They had traded their daughter for a tuition payment. The revelation didn't make me sad. It made me furious. The last remnants of grief for the family I thought I had were burned away by a cold, clarifying rage. They hadn't just pushed me out of the nest. They had sold the nest for parts and told me to fly. Fine, I thought, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. I'll fly, and I will never, ever look back. Armed with this new, chilling understanding, my perspective shifted. The goal was no longer just survival. It was to build a life so successful, so stable, that I would never be in a vulnerable position again. The small room in the quiet house became my headquarters. I used the money from my grandma to buy a month's worth of groceries and pay my phone bill, and then I poured every ounce of my energy into work. I was on my laptop 16 hours a day, taking any freelance UX/UI design job I could get, no matter how small. I designed logos for $20. I built simple one-page websites for $50. My portfolio was small, but my work was clean and professional. I underbid my competition on every platform, aiming for volume and positive reviews over high pay. It was a grueling, caffeine-fueled grind, but with every completed project, with every 5-star review, I felt a tiny piece of my power returning. My grandmother, Alina, was my rock. She would visit me every few days, bringing homemade soup and insisting I take a break and walk in the park with her. She never pitied me. Instead, she talked to me like a business partner. "How's the venture going?" she'd ask, her eyes twinkling. It was during one of these walks that she gave me another crucial piece of the puzzle. "I was talking to my old financial advisor," she said, seemingly out of the blue. "Just getting my own affairs in order. He mentioned that public records are a fascinating thing." She paused, letting the statement hang in the air. "He said you can learn a lot about a local business if you know where to look. County clerk's office, that sort of thing." It was a subtle hint, but I understood immediately. She was telling me to dig. The next day, I spent hours at the public library, not for the free Wi-Fi, but for the access to public record databases. I started with my father's diner, the Corner Spoon. What I found was staggering. For years, Mark had been taking out high-interest business loans. There were multiple liens against the diner's property from suppliers who hadn't been paid. Property tax records showed he was 2 years behind. He had remortgaged the family home, our home, to the absolute limit. The diner wasn't just struggling, it was a sinking ship, and my father was desperately bailing water with a teaspoon. The timeline was damning. The largest and most recent loan had been taken out just 3 weeks before I was kicked out. The amount? almost exactly the cost of 1 year's tuition at Kyle's university. He hadn't just cut me off to save money. He had leveraged his entire financial future on the hope that his golden child would become a high-earning business mogul and save the family. It was a desperate, reckless gamble, and I was the first piece he had chosen to sacrifice. The investigation didn't stop there. I found court records showing that Karen had a history of financial problems before she married my dad. She had declared bankruptcy once and had a string of credit card debt lawsuits against her. She hadn't come into the marriage as a partner, come in looking for a lifeline, and she had found one in my father's naive belief in her. She wasn't just a passive enabler. She was likely the architect of this whole disaster, pushing Mark to spend money they didn't have to keep up appearances and fund her son's lavish lifestyle. The picture that emerged was one of profound irresponsibility and selfish desperation. They were living in a house of cards, and they had pulled out my foundation card to keep it from collapsing for just a little while longer. The anger I felt was different now. It was less of a hot rage and more of a cold, hard certainty. They were not just bad parents. They were foolish, reckless people who were destined to fail. I didn't need to do anything to get revenge. They were writing their own downfall. All I had to do was step aside and let them. That realization was liberating. I stopped thinking about them entirely. Their names, their faces, their drama, I locked it all away in a box in my mind and refused to open it. My focus became singular, my work. I started bundling my services, offering a logo, website, and branding guide as a package deal. My prices were still competitive, but the package deals brought in more substantial income. I saved obsessively. Every dollar that didn't go to rent or food was put into a high-yield savings account. I built a professional website to showcase my growing portfolio. I started networking online, joining design communities, and offering advice for free, which led to referrals and better-paying clients. The tide was beginning to turn. I was no longer just surviving. I was building. 3 months after I was kicked out, I had enough steady income to move out of the rented room and into my own small studio apartment. It was tiny, with a kitchen the size of a closet, but it was all mine. The day I signed the lease, I called a leaner. "The investment paid off," I told her, my voice thick with emotion. "I have my own place." I could hear the smile in her voice. "I never had a doubt," she said. "Not for a second." The next 5 months were a testament to the power of focus. Having my own space, even a small one, was transformative. It was a sanctuary that nobody could take away from me. I decorated it sparsely with second-hand furniture, but every piece was chosen by me for me. The silence was the best part. There was no blaring TV, no passive-aggressive comments, no constant, draining tension. There was only peace and the quiet hum of my laptop, the sound of my future being built click by click. My freelance business began to flourish in this new environment. The positive reviews I had accumulated started to pay off, pushing my profile to the top of freelance platforms. I was able to be more selective about the projects I took on, choosing clients who valued my work and were willing to pay for it. My rates slowly crept up from bargain basement to respectable, and then to premium. I landed my first major client 4 months after moving into my studio. It was a tech startup that needed a complete user interface overhaul for their new app. The project was complex, challenging, and paid more than I had ever made in a single month. I poured my heart into it, working late nights and weekends, driven by a passion I hadn't realized was so deeply ingrained in me. The client was thrilled with the result. They not only paid me a handsome bonus, but also put me on a monthly retainer for ongoing consultation work. This was the turning point. The retainer gave me a stable, predictable income stream, a safety net that allowed me to take bigger risks and pursue even more ambitious projects. The fear of ending up back in my car began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of confidence and security. I started investing in myself. I took online courses to learn new coding languages and advanced design principles. I subscribed to industry journals. I built a network of other freelance designers, and we would share leads, critique each other's work, and offer support. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was part of a community that saw my value. As my income grew, I upgraded my life in small, meaningful ways. I bought a new, reliable laptop. I replaced my worn-out clothes. I started eating healthier, no longer subsisting on instant noodles and coffee. These weren't extravagant luxuries, they were acts of self-care, affirmations that I was worth the investment. My biggest splurge was moving into a proper one-bedroom apartment 8 months after that horrible day. It had a separate bedroom, a modern kitchen, and a small balcony that overlooked a park. The day I moved in, I sat on that balcony with a cup of tea and watched the sunset. The sense of accomplishment was overwhelming. I had done it. I had gone from having my life in a trash bag on a lawn to this peace, this view. This was all mine, built with my own 2 hands. During this time, I maintained absolute radio silence with my father's side of the family. Why I had blocked Mark, Karen, and Kyle on my phone and on all social media platforms the day I was kicked out. I didn't want updates, I didn't want apologies, and I certainly didn't want to see pictures of Kyle enjoying the university education I had been sacrificed for. The only connection I maintained was with my grandmother Eleanor and my Aunt Susan. Eleanor and I had dinner together every Sunday. She never pressed me for details about my work or finances, but she watched my confidence grow with a quiet, proud smile. Susan would occasionally send me updates, which I read with a detached curiosity. She told me Kyle was struggling at university, that his grades were poor, and that he was complaining about the workload. She mentioned that the diner seemed to be doing worse than ever, with fewer customers each time she drove past. I listened to this news without emotion. It was like reading a story about strangers. Their fate had nothing to do with me anymore. I was on a completely different path, one that led up and away, while theirs seemed to be spiraling downward. I felt no satisfaction, no schadenfreude. I just felt nothing. And that indifference was the surest sign that I was truly free. One evening, as I was finishing up a project, a notification popped up on my laptop. It was a connection request on a professional networking site. The name was unfamiliar, but the company was the tech startup I was on retainer with. I accepted it, thinking it was a colleague. A moment later, a message appeared. Incredible portfolio, Daisy. We're looking for a full-time lead UX designer to join our team. The position is fully remote, with a competitive salary and benefits. Would you be open to a conversation? I stared at the message, my heart pounding. A lead designer position. Full-time, remote. It was a dream job, the kind of career milestone I thought was still years away. I typed back a reply, my hands trembling slightly. Yes, I wrote. I would be very interested. As I hit send, I looked around my beautiful apartment at the life I had built from the ashes of the one they had destroyed. This was more than just success, it was validation. It was proof that my grandmother had been right. They couldn't put out the fire inside me. I had just needed to find my own place to let it burn brightly. The interview process for the lead UX designer position was intense. There were multiple rounds, a technical skills test, and a portfolio presentation to the company's executive team. With each stage, my confidence grew. I wasn't the scared, homeless girl from 8 months ago. I was a professional with a proven track record. I spoke about my design philosophy, walked them through my most successful projects, and answered their questions with a calm assurance that surprised even myself. 2 days after my final interview, they called and offered me the job. The salary they proposed was more than I had ever imagined earning at this stage in my career. It was life-changing money. I accepted on the spot, a huge smile spreading across my face as I hung up the phone. I immediately called Eleanor. She shrieked with delight, and I could hear the pride welling in her voice. I told you, she said, laughing. I told you that you were a brilliant investment. I started my new job the following week. The work was demanding but incredibly rewarding. I was leading a small team, making high-level design decisions, and shaping the future of a product used by millions of people. I finally felt like I had not just a job, but a career. The stability was the best part. A steady paycheck, health insurance, a retirement plan, all the markers of adulthood that had once seemed impossibly out of reach. Life settled into a comfortable, happy rhythm. Work, dinners with grandma, weekend hikes, and quiet evenings in my peaceful apartment. The family I had left behind was a distant memory, a chapter from a book I had long since finished reading. And then, one Tuesday night, exactly 8 months to the day I was kicked out, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Daisy, it's your dad." My blood ran cold. I hadn't seen his name on my phone in so long. My first instinct was to block the number and delete the message, but morbid curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. "We need to talk, it's important." I stared at the message for a long time, then set my phone down and ignored it. An hour later, another message came through. "Please, Daisy, just call me." Then another and another. Over the next few hours, a steady stream of messages began to pour in. They started as requests, then became more pleading. "Kyle is in some trouble. The diner isn't doing well. Your stepmother is very worried. We made a mistake." The messages were short, desperate bursts of information, each one more pathetic than the last. I didn't respond to any of them. I just watched as the notification count climbed. By the next morning, there were 27 messages. It continued throughout the day. Karen started texting me too from her number, which I had forgotten to block. Her messages were a masterclass in passive-aggressive guilt tripping. A daughter would care about her family's struggles. "I suppose you're too busy with your fancy new life to help the people who raised you. We did everything for you, and this is how you repay us." It was almost comical. They had literally thrown me and my belongings onto the street, and now they were lecturing me on familial duty. The message count hit 50, then 60. By the time I went to bed on the second night, there were 72 unread messages from 3 different numbers: Mark, Karen, and now Kyle. Kyle's were the most revealing. "Dad said you're good with money stuff. He said I should ask you for help. My tuition is due." The sheer audacity of it all was breathtaking. They hadn't reached out to apologize. They hadn't asked if I was okay. They had reached out because their gamble had failed and they needed a bailout. Kyle was failing, the diner was collapsing, and their last desperate move was to turn to the non-essential asset they had liquidated. On the third day, my phone rang. It was my dad. I let it go to voicemail. The message he left was a rambling, incoherent mess. His voice was thick with a desperation I had never heard before. He talked about loans being called in, about the university threatening to kick Kyle out, about how they were going to lose the house. He ended the message by saying the one thing I never thought I would hear. "I'm sorry, Daisy," he choked out. "I was wrong. Please, please come back. We need you." Come back. The words hung in the air long after the voicemail ended. Come back to what? To the chaos? To the disrespect? To being a financial tool they could use and discard at will? I thought about my beautiful apartment, my fulfilling career, my peaceful life. I thought about my grandmother's unwavering belief in me. Then I thought about the pile of my belongings on the lawn and the cold, resolute look on my father's face. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over the block button. This was the confrontation. Not a screaming match, not a dramatic scene, just a quiet, simple choice. I could engage, I could get pulled back into their vortex of drama and failure, or I could close the door for good. I pressed the button. Number blocked. Then I did the same for Karen's number and for Kyle's. I deleted the voicemails and the 72 messages without listening to or reading the rest. I felt a profound sense of calm wash over me. It was over. For real this time. The flood of messages wasn't a cry for help. It was the last gasp of a sinking ship, and I was no longer on board. I was safe on the shore, watching my own sun rise. A week after the barrage of texts and calls, there was a knock on my apartment door. My heart jumped into my throat. My building had a security entrance. No one could get up without being buzzed in. I looked through the peephole and felt a jolt of shock. It was my father. He looked terrible. He was thinner, with dark circles under his eyes, and his clothes were rumpled. He looked 10 years older than the last time I'd seen him. How did he find me? He must have gotten my address from Aunt Susan or Grandma, though I couldn't imagine either of them giving it up willingly. He must have begged or worn them down. He knocked again, a little louder this time. "Daisy, I know you're in there. I saw your car. Please, can we just talk?" For a moment, I was tempted to stay silent, to pretend I wasn't home. But then I looked around my living room, at the framed prints on the wall, the thriving plant on my bookshelf, the life I had built. This was my territory. I wasn't going to hide in my own home. I took a deep breath, unlocked the deadbolt, and opened the door. I didn't open it all the way, just enough to see him and for him to see me. I stood there, blocking the entrance, my arms crossed. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Daisy," he started, his voice rough. "Thank you for opening the door." I didn't say anything, I just waited. "Can I come in?" he asked. "No," I said. The word was quiet but firm. It hung in the air between us, a solid wall. Surprise and hurt flickered across his face. He had clearly expected that once he was here, on my doorstep, I would fold. "Look," he said, running a hand through his thinning hair. "I know you're angry, you have every right to be. What I did, it was wrong. I was desperate. The diner was failing Kyle's tuition." He trailed off, as if the list of excuses would somehow justify his actions. "I know all about the diner's finances," I said, my voice as cold and flat as his had been 8 months ago. "I also know about the loans, the liens, and the remortgaged house. This wasn't a mistake, Dad. It was a business decision. And I was the asset you chose to liquidate." The color drained from his face. He was stunned that I knew the details, Had I seen behind the curtain of their flimsy excuses. "How?" he stammered. "It doesn't matter how," I cut him off. "What matters is that you're not here to apologize. You're here because your gamble didn't pay off and you need more money. You're here to ask me to bail you out." He couldn't meet my eyes. He looked down at his shoes, the picture of a defeated man. "Kyle got put on academic probation," he mumbled. "They're going to kick him out if we can't pay for next semester. The bank is threatening to foreclose on the house. Karen, she left last week, took what little money was left in the business account and disappeared." A bitter, humorless laugh escaped my lips. Of course she did. A rat fleeing a sinking ship. The irony was almost too perfect. He finally looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine tears in his eyes. "I've lost everything, Daisy. The diner, the house, my wife. I can't lose my son, too. And I don't want to lose you again. You're my daughter." That was the line that sealed it. "You're my daughter." The words meant nothing now. They were just a tool, another attempt at manipulation. "You lost me 8 months ago," I said, my voice unwavering. "You lost me when you stood on that porch and watched me drive away. You didn't see a daughter then. You saw a solution to a financial problem. Well, I'm not a solution anymore." I reached into my pocket, but instead of keys, I pulled out my checkbook and a pen. I wrote a check, my movements calm and deliberate. I made it out to my grandmother, Alina. The amount was for the first month's rent and security deposit she had given me, plus a generous amount of interest. I folded it and held it out to him. "Please give this to Grandma," I said. "It's the last debt I have connected to this family, and now it's paid. She was the only one who invested in me. You just tried to sell me off." He stared at the check, confused. "What about me?" "What about the diners?" "The diner is not my problem," I said, my voice softening slightly, not with pity but with finality. "The house is not my problem. Kyle is not my problem. And you, Dad, are not my problem anymore. I wish you well. I truly do. But my life, my home, and my help are no longer available to you." I placed the check in his hand and gently pushed the door closed, clicking the lock into place. I stood there for a long time, listening as his footsteps shuffled away, followed by the sound of the elevator descending. There was no triumph, no joy, just a quiet, profound sense of closure. I had faced him not with anger or a thirst for revenge, but with boundaries. I had set my terms. I had said my goodbye. I walked over to my balcony and looked out at the park. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was a new day dawning, and for the first time, I felt completely and utterly free of the shadows of my past. My name was Daisy, and my future was my own.